La población mundial está creciendo. Existe una creciente demanda por alimentos de alta calidad, sabrosos, saludables y cuidando el bienestar animal. Esto brinda la oportunidad a algunos países para abastecer al mercado mundial. Argentina es uno de ellos, ya que tiene un clima favorable y abundantes recursos naturales. La agricultura representa un sector importante y es un pilar indispensable para el progreso social y la prosperidad económica. Sus exportaciones agrícolas generan el 60% de los ingresos extranjeros del país. La industria porcina argentina ha crecido rápidamente. Desde 2010, tanto el consumo como la producción de carne porcina han aumentado más del 150%, una de las cifras más altas en todo el mundo. Están dadas las circunstancias para que la Argentina optimice la cadena porcina y aproveche las oportunidades del mercado mundial. Los Países Bajos pueden colaborar a lograrlo. Para satisfacer los mercados de alta exigencia, la cadena porcina debe garantizar productos sostenibles y seguros, protegiendo el bienestar animal. Los Países Bajos son reconocidos por sus conocimientos avanzados y por su experiencia en toda la cadena de valor en la industria porcina. Desde la genética, la nutrición, el alojamiento, los sistemas de control, la gestión agrícola, el tratamiento de efluentes, hasta el procesamiento de la carne y la cadena de frío. Todo ello adaptable a las circunstancias locales. Mediante el intercambio de conocimientos, la capacitación y la tecnología, ofrecemos a la industria porcina herramientas para hacer crecer su negocio y mejorar su calidad de vida. Trabajando en conjunto entre los gobiernos, las empresas y las instituciones educativas, podemos inspirarnos mutuamente y al mundo entero a desarrollar una cadena porcina integrada, eficiente y sostenible. Resolviendo juntos los desafíos globales.
Hola y bienvenidos a este webinar. Good morning, good afternoon or good evening and welcome to this special webinar devoted to the theme of optimizing meat quality, and that is a topic that requires the cooperation of the total chain. This webinar is organized by Gita Porcino, is the Grupo de Intercambio Tecnológico Argentino-Holandés. In good English, a cluster of 11 Dutch companies working together with stakeholders in Argentina to optimize the local supply chain in Argentina. This is the fifth of 6 webinars in which practical issues and practical solutions are being presented. And each of them will spend attention to a specific theme within the industry, from breeding to slaughter. And this fifth webinar, as said, we will devote attention to meat quality. The total package of all these webinars is aimed at creating a better reaching out at pork producers and surrounding industries in Argentina. We are broadcasting from a studio in The Hague in the Netherlands, and my name is Vincent Terbeek. I'm editor for Pig Progress, and that's a media platform for swine production all around the globe. And I will be your host for the next hour, happily supporting this initiative. This webinar I will not do on my own. As you can see, I'm joined by Roel van der Zanden of VDZ Trading, as well as Peter ter Linde of Leo. And at a distance with us is also Dr. Grant Walling of Topics Norsvin. We shall follow the pig and its meat through the meat chain, and we'll start at slaughter and we go back all the way back to the breeding stage. Each of my presenters will speak for roughly 10 minutes. And at the very end there will be a Q&A session of roughly 15 minutes. And as this webinar is aimed at an Argentinian audience, everything will be subtitled in Spanish, but since we have an international amount of speakers here, we will speak in English. And as you can see, also the presentations behind us are all in Spanish. Right, let me turn to the first speaker. Left of me is Roel van der Zanden. He's Executive Managing Director of VDZ Trading, located in Sint-Oedenrode in the south of the Netherlands. And the company is specialized in providing the best available slaughter equipment for the best price. He's been doing this job for over 18 years after having studied at the Eindhoven University of Technology. And we'll start at the last step to acquire good meat quality at slaughter and processing. Roel, welcome. And take it away.
Hello, I'm Roel van der Zande. I'm the owner of VDZ Trading. We are specialized in used and new equipment for slaughtering, meat processing, and related waste management industries. Thank you for introducing me. The goal. All of us are working together towards one goal. A famous industrial in the Netherlands started his company by selling drills. However, as he always said himself, his customers never wanted drills, they wanted holes. The goal of our complete production chain, everything we are doing, everything we are developing, is geared towards meat. We want good, hygienic, affordable, high quality meat. The process to get there. The slaughtering process is the last step in a long chain to convert pigs into the final product. It is very important to make sure the animals are relaxed before entering the slaughterhouse. High quality electric or CO2 stunners have to be used to avoid any adverse effects on the carcass. Current solutions for cleaning and dehairing the carcass avoid dipping it in water, as well as ensuring it is cleaned and sterilized before it's opened up. All of this helps ensure the hygiene and the shelf life of the meat. For opening the carcass and removing the organ, specialized machinery and trained staff are required to avoid damage to the valuable parts, as well as guarantee the hygienic work. At the end of the line, most data points are collected for feedback into the system by weighing and classifying the carcasses by weight, shape, possible diseases, damages, or other issues. This helps us gather all the data. The leading data point is the market preference. Usually this is based on the home market, but can also be aimed at a specific export market as well. As example, bacon is the main product for most UK, Danish and USA plants, while ham is the main product in Italian and Spanish plants. This data point is purely focused on the goal of the whole production chain. Data points gathered during the process before slaughtering are, among others, genetics used, the feed and medicine animals had, as well as the environment they grew up in. Finally, at the slaughter, during the slaughter and at the end of the slaughter, we gather more data points regarding the weight, shape, and fat to lean ratio of the meat. This is done by visual observation as well as automated systems, which consistently register the same data points for each carcass. With the help of these data points, we can create a feedback loop. Starting with the genetics data, adding to this the data during weaning and fattening, and completing the data set with the information gathered during the slaughtering and processing of the animals, we acquire a complete overview of the production chain. This allows us to give constant feedback to each stage of the process, allowing fine adjustment to achieve the best final product. And the result is constant improvement. By using full traceability, analyzing the data points gathered, and adjusting the whole production chain accordingly, we can achieve a constant improvement. This allows us to adjust quickly to market changes, as well as being able to provide specific specifications of end product easily. Management of the data and building on the knowledge acquired by our years of experience leads to affordable, quality, and hygienic meat. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roel. Excellent presentation and fascinating world to be introduced to. I took a quick look at your website and I've seen that you've been doing business all around the world, including Latin America.
Yes.
You might want to introduce what kind of business you did in Latin America already, so people from Argentina have a bit of an idea how far your reach is.
Well, actually, my father's business started with a project in Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
Due to economic reasons in the country there that didn't get to fruition. But after that, Suriname has become our home base. In South America, we built the pork slaughterhouse and the cattle slaughterhouse there in Paramaribo City. And we've done some advising work and some minor projects in Argentina, Brazil, Ecuador, Bolivia, So it's an upcoming market for us. We would like to explore further.
Yes, and a stable base in Suriname already, so
Yes.
They know how to find you. Excellent, thank you very much. Well, as you said, meat quality is a matter of the whole chain, so we started looking at the slaughter equipment. We move a little bit earlier in the stage of a life, so to say, and then we end up with Peter Terlinde, CEO of precision livestock farming company Leo in the Netherlands. You manage to track all kinds of data that happen during a pig's life, and that's how you do it. With RFID tagging, it is possible to track a lot of developments in an animal's life. So how can that precision technology help us to know exactly what happened? Please share your ideas with us.
Yeah, I will do so. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your previous presentation, Roel. It's been going to be very fun to add up onto that. First of all, Leo organization built upon the idea of individual registration to actually build upon a more traceable piece of meat and actually adding quality and sustainability to an entire chain. And the chain part here is what's important. To understand a little bit how we currently, or most organizations are currently producing pork in that sense. You can see right now that there's a bunch of silos within the production process. The first, when the animals are being born, you gain knowledge about that specific process. And that knowledge is being reflected inside your organization, but that knowledge is not so much passed on to the next generation. So when the animal leaves and goes to fattening, you literally don't know anything about that animal. So it's very difficult to control the quality and to make better decisions based upon what's happening before there. So, and when these animals actually come to slaughter, the end result that is being captured there, as Roel so elegantly put it there, it is very difficult to trace that back into the chain. So in that chain, you can see that you register certain amounts of what kind of medication it got, what kind of feed it got, the genetic background, everything is there. It's simply not shared within the chain. So we have a vision to say, if you want to optimize a chain, you cannot just look at yourself. You have to really look at everybody you are working with. And that's a very important part of what we is. And this is kind of visualizing how we see that. You see on the right side, you can actually measure the actual carcass there. You know the information, the technical information, the weight, the fat, the muscle, all those lean ratios, everything you know. The thing that we are specialized in is get that information back in production. So when you synchronize that information actually to the farmer, you can use that to make better decisions on the breeding part, better decision on the feeding part, better decision on the way you hold your animals. That helps you to optimize your production, but also be very aligned with what the demands of the specific customers in the world are. On top of that, we understand the importance of good genetics inside this chain. So if you want to have a good result at the end, you need to start at the very beginning. So that is why within the integrated approach as we have, we take those results that we get from the slaughter plant. We add on top of those results everything we register inside the farm on an individual level to trace it back, and we send those elements to the genetic company, Atopics, and they make breeding value calculations based on that. Those breeding value calculations tell you a whole lot about the performance of the genetic lines that they have and the certain mother sows that you are actually receiving and the boar semen that you're receiving with that. Because this information is being sent back, loop back to them, you can optimize your breeding program based on those breeding values that you're actually getting. If you manage this, to integrate this approach and to work really as a supply chain and not so much as a silo, you will see that your performance will grow rapidly. We are measuring 8 to 12% per year performance increase. Why is that? We can see that genetic progress is about 20% per year on the breeding animals. That reflects to the actual production animals too. So if you take full advantages of those calculations and of those advantages in your system and apply the way you feed them, treat them, and the way you transport them throughout the chain, you will actually see that there will be a very big increase in your operating performance. So what we try to do is actually not so much think in silos, but way more look at the actual process itself. The line you see is the knowledge we gain throughout that, and we can grow exponentially in knowledge and create, as we say, kind of a collective learning model if we connect all the dots. So we say knowing all cycles of production means we never stop learning. On top of that is, of course, if you gather this information throughout this chain and you know everything from the results at slaughter and also of the performance indicators of the sow you're starting with, you can make very high quality claims on a specific meat. Let's see, the instance you have right here is there's the ALG logo that stands for antibiotic free life guarantee. One of our customers is using that because they track everything within the chain. They know exactly the background of these animals and what they've been exposed to. They can sort out at the slaughter plant which animals did not have antibiotics, yes or no. So in this type of seed, you can actually add value to the carcass, not so much by optimizing your process, but also using the information gathered throughout the life to optimize this value of the carcass too. So this is where my story actually stops, and I think we're going to the next step, or the first step in the chain in that sense.
Most certainly. Thank you very much for that presentation. I saw in one of your first slides, Peter, that there was this grain or maize symbol above one of the pigs. Just decides that. Does it mean that we can kind of track which kind of feed animals were fed during their lives? Is that something that you could track?
Yeah, absolutely. We one of the very important parts of our system is that we want to absolutely allocate which animals has been exposed to what feed and for what period of time. We do this for measuring the quality of the meat, but also to do carbon footprint calculation, CO2 footprint calculation. So if you want to know what has been, if you want to have a sustainable type of a pig, feed is a very important factor in that. So we absolutely trace that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, animals fed on chestnuts, for instance, that's something else that you can have, or prove that they actually had them.
Exactly. And
that's saying is one thing, but doing it is another.
Yeah, and actually having the license to comply to that is something that in the future will be more and more licensed to produce and licensed to be part of a certain chain. You need to prove it with data, or else it's not there.
Well, as you heard, the word chain is something that is coming back regularly in this webinar, and certainly we're going to step a little bit earlier again in the life of a pig, and that's where we start, come with the beginning, with the breeding part. And for that I would like to welcome Dr. Grant Walling. Hello there. He's attached to Topics Norsvin, and he is a very well-known person in the swine industry. After a career at the Roslin Institute as well as JSR Genetics, he became Senior Service Geneticist with Topics Norsvin in 2021, and he's also head of the meat group within the company. So we thought there is no better person to invite than him. His presentation is called Selección Genética para satisfacer las demandas del mercado. Take it away, Grant.
Thanks for the introduction, Vincent, and thanks for the previous speakers for creating a great platform for me to talk about. As already been highlighted, although my background is in genetics, much of what I do is with the meat group, and that's a group of people, including meat scientists, that are responsible for tracing our product as we leave the farm until it basically hits the plates of our consumers, eating the product wherever we go around the world. If we just go to the next slide, please. So that's a little bit about me and what we do. And very much we're focused on how our product performs from a meat point of view. At the end of the day, people don't produce pigs because they want pigs. They produce pigs because they want pork. Next slide, please. So the first thing to think about is, how do we actually meet the various different pork standards? Next slide, please. And the first thing to say is that all products actually must meet the standards for their category that they're aimed at. And a lot of people are aware that luxury products maybe have to meet some quite higher standards, like we see here on the left-hand side, darker colors, more intramuscular fat. But even the standard products have minimum standards that they need to meet for them to be acceptable for retailers and consumers. Next slide, please. And if we look at how we do this from a breeding and a genetics point of view, the first thing that you can do is target your individual sire lines to meet the specifics of each sector. And we can perhaps think of the pork market into sort of three different sectors. If we think of a budget, lower quality sector, here represented on the left-hand side, these tend to be very high yielding animals, typically Peartrim based, that give a high carcass yield, but a relatively low meat eating quality. In the middle, we have the standard quality medium lean yielding carcasses. And these are coming from more conventional white sires or some of the mainstream Duroc sires. And then on the right-hand side, there's very specialist products that are designed to meet very high quality meat quality markets. So we can use sire line in order to actually influence our various different meat quality standards. If we go to the next slide, please. And the way that we can do that as a breeding company is to change our breeding goals depending on which sector we're aiming at. So if, for example, we were in that middle sector, the standard meat eating quality, we would want to make sure that we weren't seeing any deterioration in the important traits. Next slide, please. We also have to look at the carcass, because at the end of the day, people use the pig slightly differently. Vincent's already highlighted this in his introduction, and therefore we have to change the different carcass quality traits in the breeding goal. Go to the next slide. Historically, we did this by doing a lot of measurements on the loin. You can see in the images there, someone taking an ultrasound image of the loin on the back of the pig. And over time, we can increase the lean meat and decrease the back fat. But obviously, we're using the whole carcass, and therefore, just taking a measurement on the loin is not always going to be helpful for actually increasing the value and quality of the entire carcass. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see what we're able to use nowadays. And so whilst we heard from our previous speaker, we can collect information at the slaughter plant and feed that back into our systems. Obviously, those animals at the slaughter plant we can never use for breeding. If we put them through a CT scanning machine, we then have a very different proposition, because that animal will recover and can be used for breeding. And then we have an idea of the whole value of the carcass and how that performs. If we go to the next slide, when we did this initially, what we were able to do is to split up the carcass into the white sections on the images, which is the bone, the light gray, which is the lean meat, and then the darker gray, which is the fatness, which you can see around the edge of the carcass, because that's where the pigs generally deposit it. This is okay, but obviously depending on where that lean meat is in the carcass depends on the different values. And so as we move to the next slide, what we'll see here is that we could tell the computer which parts of the carcass correspond to the various different primal cuts. So the ham, the loin, the belly, and the shoulder, which all have different values, we could tell our computer on a lot of carcasses which where these were located and how to identify them. And then over time, using a process of machine learning, the computer actually starts to recognize these, and we can start to actually automate these scans on live animals. Next slide, please. And because the various different primals have different values, we can then start to put different selection pressures on different ones. So we can see in this example here, the belly is by far the most valuable cut, and therefore there is significantly greater reward for improving the belly compared to improving some of the lower value cuts. If we go to the next slide, please. What we're able to do nowadays, and as our previous speaker actually highlighted, is generate breeding values for things like the lean meat percentage and carcass yield of the overall carcass, but also be able to do exactly the same in each of the individual primal cuts. Now, you may ask, does this work? Is there any value in it? Well, if we go to the next slide, we're pretty confident that there is. We do a huge amount of work going to the various different slaughter plants and seeing how the various different sire-line progeny cut up into their various different pieces. And then we can actually work on looking at the values of these and coming up with an overall value of the carcass. So we try to validate the work that we're doing. Next slide, please. But finally, what we shouldn't do is we should not forget about the consumer. Ultimately, we want to eat these products. And whilst we may have optimized the amount of belly, we have to make sure that it's edible. So if we go to the next slide, one of the things that we can do is we can look at some of the traits that are really important to the consumer. Things like cooking loss. You can see here someone weighing the product both before and after, but also tenderness. People make a lot of judgments between how much pressure they have to apply with their mouth on food. Tough, chewy food is not attractive at all. So if you move to the next slide, one of the ultimate tools that we have is a taste panel. And this gives us a very good opportunity to look at how the consumer appreciates our products and allows us to compare different products to see whether or not they fit the sector which they're designed for. So just to summarize on the final slide, please. What we've covered here is that basically all our products have to meet the quality standards for the sector in which they're aimed. And the breeding goals that we use as a genetics company are very much sector dependent. And whilst a lot of that work was historically done on the loin, the new technologies like CT scanning means that we can put this across the entire carcass. And even though we're looking at an entire carcass, it's really important that we still don't forget that consumer because they've got to eat it at the end of the day. Thanks very much. That's where I finish on this, and thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Grant. An excellent presentation. I've learned a lot again. You showed a number of different boars, sires, so to say, which ones are, well, some of them have a better carcass yield, others have other qualities. Which one would you say would be the best for the Argentinian market, seeing that they like a good piece of meat as well?
I think it's very difficult to come up and say only one thing, because ultimately there will be sectors within the market. What we tend to find is that if you look on a retailer's shelf, there'll be a proportion of premium product, and maybe that premium product's maybe 10, 15%. And then there'll be a larger proportion, which is the standard product at a more accessible price point for the majority. And there's potentially a budget product as well. So depending on which part of that you're aiming for, you've got to be a little bit careful. That mainstream sector does cover the vast majority of what we do, and that's where you're seeing the mainstream Durox and some of the white lines in there, and that will cover. I would expect that to cover a large proportion of the Argentinian market.
Thank you for that. We'll come back to you, Grant, in a moment. So please don't go away, because I would like to close off all the presentations and go for a roundtable discussion in general about this. We've been talking about the whole chain, and I would like to for each of you to reflect on what the other two are doing. So you've been talking about the slaughtering equipment. I would like you to reflect on how important it is that also there is a decent tracking during an animal's life, as well as decent genetics. How that helps you get your product better to the market.
Well, that came forward quite nicely in Grant's presentation as well. With the genetics, they're looking at something like drip loss.
Mm-hmm.
That's specifically in the cold stores, and it's very much related to the process of bringing a pig into a slaughterhouse. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. And the method of stunning, killing, and processing
mm-hmm.
as well. The same as the stunning itself, using a good CO2 stunner, having a more relaxed pig when it's being stunned before slaughter has a great influence on the final pH level. Mm-hmm. So it's really playing between the genetics they provide, the information that's gathered throughout the lifetime, as well as during the slaughter process, mm-hmm. and tweaking the slaughtering process to fit all the factors of the product coming in to make sure the product going out is mm-hmm. up to specification.
Yeah, because you can have fantastic slaughter equipment, but if the other parts of the chain are so to say, then it doesn't make sense to say, okay, you really need to go for good quality material.
If you input bad quality, you get bad quality on the output. Mm-hmm. If you input good quality, but you have bad equipment or a bad process, you output bad quality. And that's why the chain from A to Z has to be connected at the same level.
Peter, do you have anything to add to that?
It's what we stand for
mm-hmm.
in that sense. So yes, I do have to add, what I see and what I really much like is that people are starting to value and see the entire chain as a whole. Mm-hmm. And that's a pretty shifting in the way people think about the industry right now. And right now we're actually proving this together with Atopics, with mm-hmm. the equipment that's being sold by VDC. We can do this together, mm-hmm. but we have to do it together. So this is what we absolutely stand for, and I believe that with continuing bringing this message, we can actually see that it's not, you don't share data for somebody else, you also do it for yourself. Mm-hmm. So, and that's I think we're making very good steps in that. Absolutely.
Yeah, Grant, how about you? I mean, I can imagine that you think the same. You have decent genetics, and if the rest is just not up to speed, then it doesn't really matter to have good genetics.
Well, exactly. You'll be amazed at how much effort goes in the 10 months from serving the sow through to actually producing that animal to the point of slaughter to try and make sure that we get the very best quality. And yet the number of times where we see that things go wrong in either the last 4 hours of the animal's life or the last 4 hours after the animal has actually been killed. And that basically undoes all the work. And it's all those things that we've just talked about there. It's about how animals are handled when they arrive at the slaughter plant, how they are stunned, and the methods that are actually used there, and how those animals are handled and right the way through to chilling, because that has an enormous impact and basically can undo 10 months of very good work pretty much overnight. And so the more that we can get that bit right and the more data that we can capture at that point, because when things go wrong, we need the data to actually understand what's happening. That's what then allows us to actually go back and actually optimize that supply chain. And we can't just turn around and say, well, we've done our bit, we've put our genetics in, because ultimately, if the product isn't right at the other end, then we have a problem.
I see. Another question for all of you. We're talking about the whole chain here, yet there is one aspect we haven't talked about here, which has a great influence on meat quality, and I think that's animal nutrition. We haven't talked about that yet. I would like to hear from each of you how nutrition can also help to enhance meat quality. Well,
on our side, the nutrition combined with the genetics, the way the animal is fed, has a great influence on and that's mostly shape, fattiness, those things. Mm-hmm. That's where our influence isn't so great. Mm-hmm. It's more the relation with the genetics, and the feed is what makes up the taste and the makeup of the meat. Mm-hmm. That's something we cannot improve anymore at slaughtering. Mm-hmm. But as Grant says, when the process is done in the wrong way, it is something that can be screwed up.
Yeah.
And that's where we go to the customer and where the previous data is important to know what the customer likes.
Yeah. Well, how does nutrition play a role in this whole process?
Yeah, I think it's as you put it, very good. It's very important. It's very important for a customer perspective, but also from the actual breeding perspective. From a customer perspective, you are what you eat, is what people say. So there is absolute taste reflected in the nutrition. That's
the animal is also what it eats.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you will. There are things, and you can align with that, and you can play with that if you want to have certain flavors or certain texture presented to a certain market. So there are absolutely correlations with that, but you have to measure what the animal ate, or else you simply cannot do that. And on the other hand is you can steer a lot with uniformity of carcasses, especially in the last month before they go to slaughter. You can actually steer with the nutritions and values in your feed to actually make a uniform type pig when it goes to slaughter. So in two ways, feed and nutrition in that sense absolutely helps. Yeah.
Grant?
Now, nutrition is really important for us, and we work very closely with our feed group at Top Pigs Norsewind, because we see that many of the problems or many of the benefits that we can achieve through our animals can be either enhanced or basically detracted from the feed. And so there's the obvious thing about carcass grading in terms of fatness, but also fat quality is really influenced by feed. So that's how firm the fat is. And that's really important for the types of products that you get at the end and how the product actually slices and how it will cure. But there's other elements as well, things like feed withdrawal towards the end of an animal's life and how well that animal therefore performs in the factory. And then there's various other things in terms of you want to make sure that the animal is growing on an optimized feed curve, because the development of that animal will influence what the carcass is like and what the yields are like of the various different primal cuts. So there's huge influences, and it's very much a partnership in terms of making sure that we are getting the best in all stages of the animal's life.
And that goes to show that also the animal nutrition needs to be of high quality and needs to be also part of that chain in order to, well, be able to ensure that good quality of the meat in the end.
Very much so. And one of the challenges that we have, at a time, we're talking at a time when a number of cereal prices are quite high, that there's often a temptation to try and cut corners and find alternative products. But then there's obviously a knock-on effect if some of those products aren't of the best quality.
Thank you very much. I'm going back to Roel here. Well, you already mentioned on the side that, well, you're not only into swine equipment, there's also part of cattle and chickens. How big does the pig industry, does that form part of your business? Is that more than half, or is that one third? How?
Almost one half is the pig industry. A little bit over half is mostly cow, sheep, and a little bit of chicken industry.
Yeah, and is there a certain crossover that you learn from one another that you can?
Well, basically, once the slaughtering starts, especially for pork, beef, and sheep, the processes are very similar, and the pork industry is much more advanced in automation, in genetics. It's a bigger industry worldwide. But the things we learn in one industry, we usually can implement in other industries as well.
I would have supposed so, indeed. It is a fascinating business you're in. And Peter, I had a question for you as well. When tracking all the data throughout a pig's lifetime, is that information that consumers can in the end also consult, or is that something that for the end product it's good to know all these processes, but this is information that is not available to the consumer?
It absolutely can be, and it is being used for consumer. If you want to have a certain claim on a carcass or an animal or whatever, you need to provide data with that. Of course, within our system, you can choose in which step you want to share your data with, but in general, it is used quite a lot. to back up the claim that you're actually having that. So the sharing data and actually getting more data to the consumer actually helps them to understand what's going on in the process. And when they understand the process, they respect it more and respect the products that came from it more. So that's, it's actually more than I anticipated when we started doing this. It's more shared to consumer than we actually know.
And is that a development that you would expect that is going to grow even in the future? That there is an ongoing growing demand to knowing what's happened to an animal?
It's the new generation of people come in, they demand this transparency.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so that's something to invest in for the future then. Grant, you mentioned the taste panel. I suppose that taste panel, you need to have various of them because what is considered a nice piece of meat might be different in the UK even from Germany. How many of them are there?
In order to try and do, say, product comparisons, we would use a standard panel. But when we're working with our various different partners around the globe, we try to actually set up localized trials. As you highlight, there is individual preferences in terms of how people eat pork, the sorts of dishes that they eat and the things that they look for. So whilst we will do our comparisons on the same group every time, because then that way it gives us some consistency, obviously to determine what a product's suitability for an individual market, we would want to do that with the right mix of people that are relevant to that market. And you do see quite sizable differences, particularly once you start going into countries like Southeast Asia or even into Africa. So you can expect some changes depending on where you are in the world.
Mm-hmm. I see. Roel, I have another question for you. Well, I've seen all these cuts that you can work with. How do you feel about lab-grown meat? Because obviously, then you probably could kind of predetermine what shape of a certain kind of meat. Is that a development that you're looking at and think,
It's definitely something we're looking at, but I think we're still very far away of achieving something like the fat in the meat is the part that actually gives the taste, the influence of feed. We have, like with cattle, we have the Wagyu, which we don't allow to move. But in the end, an animal which has moved, which has lived, actually tastes better than an animal which was stuck in a little cage its whole life. And I think before we can make a lab-grown piece of meat actually taste like meat which lived, which took in the food and the environment and is passing on that part of its taste, is still very far away.
So basically you would go that is a development that would evolve into, having something that may look, that's basically a different product then.
It's a different product. It's raw cheese against factory cheese. It's both cheese, but it's a very different product.
So there's it's not something you worry about in the
not in the near future.
No, I understand that. If any of the other gentlemen wish to comment on that, then feel free to do so.
Yeah, maybe a little bit from my side. I think in general there's a market for everything. So there will also be a market for lab-grown meat. It's that simple. I don't think it will be presented as meat per se. It will be a new way of producing a product.
It's a different kind of protein.
It's a different type of product. That's what Roel said. So it in my sense, it has nothing to do with actual meat. They try to link it towards that. There will be market for it. It will be developed in a broader way. Scalability will be kind of an issue there. Yeah, I'd see that. But in general, there's market. So when there's market, people are willing to pay. So it will be part of our
perhaps
shelves in the supermarket.
If markets grow, then perhaps the price comes down, and who knows?
Yeah, exactly. So,
I think the big promise with lab-grown meat was potentially that they could do it a lot more efficiently and with a much better environmental footprint. But I think that's still yet to be fully proven. And as our two previous speakers, highlighted that it needs to be scalable as well and affordable at the end of the day, pork is consumed across a range of society, and it has to find its place. And whilst I'm guessing it will find a place, I think it will only probably occupy a certain percentage of that market.
Yeah, it is a product, but nothing compared to the real thing, so to say. What is the importance of medication during an animal's life? I mean, obviously it is possible to track vaccination, it's possible to track antibiotics. Does that have an influence on meat quality in the end?
Meat quality, I would say carcass quality, yes, and meat quality in that sense also to it, but that's not, so far we don't measure, but in the essence, yes, we do. There's a big correlation between medication usage and I wouldn't say medication usage, and that medication is used because of a reason. Yeah. And the reason has an effect on the actual performance of the carcass. Yeah, we can see that's very, very big. But
that's kind of the underlying health problem, having an effect.
Exactly. Medication is being used for a reason. And there's a diagnosis being set, and of course animals have to be treated. But people don't realize that if you treat them, if they had the disease, we probably should have prevented it from getting it in the first place.
Yeah, because if there is a health problem, you'll also see that in the carcass.
Yes, you absolutely see that in the slaughter results directly. A high correlation between that. Absolutely.
Okay, and Grant, you showed me a very interesting slide in which you had it was like you had cut open a pig, and you could see the black parts was the meat, and there was a grey part around it. If I am recalling well, that was the fatty layer around it. Is that typical for all pigs, or is there? Well, because I suppose there is also breeds where there is more fat in between.
Yeah. So obviously, there's various different places in the carcass in where you can store fat, and over time that actually changes. So when an animal's first born, the first place it lays the fat down is actually around the guts and in the intestines, and that's an evolutionary development to basically help an animal keep warm when they're very young. What tends to happen after that, as they move through, the pigs generally will then deposit fat around the outside, that subcutaneous layer, and then only once they've sort of got to their level at that particular point will they then move to laying down intramuscular fat. Now, some breeds lay down more than others, and there's some variation even within a breed. But the thing to remember is that that's something that only happens towards as an animal basically gains a certain level of maturity. So you'll never see that on a young animal, and you'll never see that on animals that basically aren't genetically sort of programmed to actually lay it down at that particular area. But yes, there is variation, and that intramuscular fat is the thing that I think Roel highlighted before. That's one of the things that basically makes meat taste good. Sure. And therefore you want that intramuscular fat, even though many people would actually openly select against it because they'll be thinking from a health point of view that's not as good. Actually, you're far better getting that and not having the taste experience.
Yeah, or maybe it should be there very subtly. Okay, we're doing a lot of questions and answers. I would like to ask each of you now to say, okay, in a few lines, what is the main message that you would like the audience to remember of this webinar? And I'll start with Roel here again.
The importance of integrating the chain and realizing that the quality in determines the quality out, and the measurements you can take in every step are the only guideline you have to control the whole chain. So to control that from the beginning all the way up to the end, including the slaughter process, measuring what's happening there and measuring what the customer actually wants, is the core to get a good pork industry running. Yeah,
you've only got one chance to do it right, so to say.
Yes.
I'm going to your neighbor.
I would say we all have the same goal. So with sharing data comes fear. So we have to trust each other a bit more and do not judge each other on the results that we have, but try to optimize and build a better chain together. That's what I would say. That's been helping. We've seen that been very successful with the implementation that we've done, but you have to go over a certain fear of sharing data that you've collected with somebody else within the chain.
And I suppose it helps that, well, each parties here at the table at least know each other already and trust each other already. So if you have one friend, you got a bunch of friends.
Exactly,
Mm-hmm.
exactly.
I see. Grant, famous last words.
I think what I would say is start at the end and work backwards. So understand your target product market and what those standards are, and then start working your way back through the supply chain to ensure that everything is optimized in order to actually deliver to that final standard. And as you step back through that supply chain, you will get everything right. And once you get back to us on the genetics point of view, you've probably gone through the entire process.
Thank you very much for that. Understand the market, don't be afraid, and do it right from the start. All kinds of messages that is very good for the industry to remember in Argentina. And with that, I'm going to draw this webinar to an end. Did this webinar appeal to you, and would you like to see more? I can reveal that there is 4 more episodes already available at gitaporcina.com, as well as at YouTube. You can find it at the Gita Porcino. If you search for it, you'll find also the previous 4 webinars. And I'm happy to share that there will be a 6th webinar in this series as well, and that will be available by the end of May or early June. The exact date will be known later, so stay tuned for that. I hope this has all been informative. I thank Roel, I thank Peter, I thank Grant for your excellent contributions and your input here. And I thank you for staying with us this hour. Muchas gracias y hasta la próxima.